and our session is about to go live. We can now see the numbers of participants starting to rise, and we'll be beginning officially at 10:01 to give others a chance to log in and get settled. CET time. Ethan, let us begin the recording. Hello all and welcome to this, the first seminar in a three-part series on the topic of valuing groundwater. This seminar focuses specifically on the topic of community-based approaches to groundwater management. So before I introduce you to today's program and to our speakers, please allow me to take a few moments to briefly explain what is meant by community-based groundwater management. One can think of groundwater management interventions in either of two ways. One of these is about top-down management interventions, primarily organised at the national level. The other is about bottom-up groundwater management interventions organised at the community level. For this seminar, we'll be focusing on the latter as an emerging and arguably more innovative approach. The documented origins of community management go back several decades or more, whereby groundwater resource users, particularly farmers, came together to organise themselves, adopt rules, monitor the resource, and self-enforce those rules so that they can govern their common pool resources in a sustainable manner. Typically, community-based groundwater, or participatory groundwater management, as it's also known, involves a major focus on demand-side management to ensure that the resource is conserved. Of course, there are also other examples where community-based supply-side management occurs as well. It's important to note that the users of the groundwater resource are typically non-experts, meaning that the way they understand and experience the resource is somewhat different to a technical expert, like I imagine that many of us in this audience are. This highlights the importance of strengthening understanding of groundwater resources so that the collective effort of communities brings direct and tangible benefits to protect and sustain the resource. I hope that this introduction is useful in setting the scene and perhaps raising a question or two for the discussion section. Today's program will be full and exciting one. Over the next 40 minutes or so, we will bring to the spotlight 4 young and dynamic speakers with a diverse range of backgrounds and experiences. Next slide, please. First, there will be a keynote on the emerging field of socio-hydrogeology, followed by cases of community-based groundwater management from South Asia and Southeast Asia. Interspersed will be 2 short videos from South Africa and India. After these presentations, we'll open up the discussion with our online audience. The names and biographies of the speakers you see on the PowerPoint slide before you, so I won't spend time to go through these details. Each speaker will have 8 minutes, and I will advise each one of those when 1 minute is remaining so that they can begin to wrap things up. Before the discussion, you'll be able to interact with the speakers through the chat box within the Particle platform. You will see that there is a discussion already started, and I encourage you to do this. Please reserve also some questions for the discussion section where we'll have 30 minutes dedicated to Q&A. So with no further ado, I hand the microphone over to Dr. Viviane Ree for her keynote presentation.
Thank you, Paul, and greetings, everyone. Next slide, please. So never like in 2022, we've been probably more aware about groundwater, mostly thanks to the global efforts for the World Water Day celebrations, but also, and unfortunately, in many parts of the world, we have seen, especially, for example, in Europe this summer, how much we depend on the buffer capacity of groundwater to cope with extreme droughts. But what do we actually know about groundwater? Next slide, please. For example, if we think of the glass or a bucket of water, we may want to know where this water comes from. So to answer this question, hydrogeology can help us to trace the origin, the evolution, and overall to quantitatively and qualitatively know and assess groundwater, our hidden source of life. The power of hydrogeology thus stands in the assessment of the underground processes and paths which many are unaware of, but on which we all depend. However, next slide, please. With a classical hydrogeological approach, we may not be able to fully answer practical and crucial questions pertaining human well-being, livelihood, and daily issues like the one that you can see depicted in or quoted in this slide. And that is something that was addressed to me a few years ago when I was studying the origin of nitrate contamination in groundwater in Senegal. Therefore, we may need a new and more comprehensive way to approach groundwater. And this is where sociohydrogeology can be useful. Next slide. If we start seeing groundwater with the lenses of sociohydrogeology, other questions may arise when you ask, where does this water come from? We may ask, for example, who collected this water, where it collected, or where the water will be used, how many people will depend on this water, which are their relationship, and who manage it. So in practice, all questions that relates people awareness, attitude, and perception, which are often unseen variables in hydrogeochemical assessment and groundwater modeling. But then, what is sociohydrogeology? Next slide. Sociohydrogeology, as the term suggests, is an inter- and transdisciplinary framework that aims at qualitatively and quantitatively integrate social sciences, hydrogeology, and local knowledge through the lens of mixed research and approaches. The core of sociohydrogeology lies in challenging current sectorial and compartmentalized approach to groundwater characterization and protection, and thus overall has the goal of making sure that scientific outcomes are really translated into effective and concrete action for groundwater protection. So then how we go from theory to practice, and in the next slides, I will show you some of the example of the many now applications that we have on sociohydrogeology. Next slide, please. Thank you. For example, how can we integrate sociohydrogeology in practice? We can go into the field and start to work on hydrogeological assessment and integrate these with some tools that are more typical of the social sciences. For example, and this I'm showing the work that we did in Tunisia, we can use the stakeholder network analysis to unpack the social factor that can define the rate of success or failure of groundwater governance. By adopting a social relational approach to groundwater resources, research and management, we can really get a lot of insights. And for example, in our case, thanks to this assessment that was performed at the very beginning of our investigation, we were able to understand how little we know, how partial was our understanding of the social structure and the composition of the stakeholders that were defining the case study that we were working on, and how biased also we noticed was our perception from the scientific point of view. And the team was composed by local Tunisian researchers and myself. So even in case when you know very well a case study, you may have a biased perception. And this is where such an integrated approach can be really useful in kind of better framing the research and try to define better the goals, and most of all, to identify which are the key stakeholders that can support you in put into practice the science-based management practices that may come from real research. Another effective way that we can see in the next slide of integrated hydrogeological assessment and social sciences, so going transdisciplinary, is to directly engage and discuss with the people that are involved in the monitoring network. This can really be useful in assessing the needs, the issue, and the perception of the water users, but also to get some information. So if you structurally insert some questionnaire administration, some public engagement in your work, you can also retrieve information that can support hydrogeochemical evidences. And this is a way to embed local know-how in your research and make sure that the knowledge and the perception and the, let's say, historical view of the people that have a daily contact with the water resources that you are studies are taken into account and are sufficiently valued. And also let me stress that taking time with talking with people actually is a good way to promote science demystification and ensure that we as scientists actively contribute to bridge the gap with society. And actually, as something that has been stressed a lot during these first days of the Water Week, we can really value human experience. Another example in the next slide that I want to share is a bit different from the previous, and is the case of a multi-stakeholders framework and areas in which many authorities are interacting with competing and sometimes overlapping issues. And this is the case of small island development states, or in the case that I'm showing in the Galapagos Island. Here we have, related to water resources, multiple agents with different and multiple functions that coexist. And sometimes it's really challenging to adequately manage water resources. So here we try to engage with a full stakeholder consultation, so engaging with all the actors, and we contributed to the creation of a water committee that is responsible for participatory monitoring and harmonization of all the available information on water and groundwater quantity. In this case, we're talking about a region that, due to its uniqueness, attracts many, not only tourists, but also research, national and international, that sometimes interact and work in the area without an harmonized collection and sharing of the available data. So as a result, most of the information stays either in gray literature or in scientific papers and are not so shared with the local communities. So harmonizing existing knowledge permits to avoid replication and makes a better use of funds, and also give time or create space for a better and joint communication with local water users that in most cases are frustrated due to the lack of interest showed by the researchers on their needs and issues. These are just a few examples, and in the next slides I report some more examples of sources where you can find more socio-hydrological application. I would be happy really to share more after the session if you're interested. But despite the peculiarities related to each case study, next slide please, all show—
1 minute to go, Viviana.
Yes, I'm reaching conclusion, thank you. All shows that going beyond classical hydrological investigation can really be valuable. And this can ensure, for example, that we do not involuntarily cause conflict or marginalize stakeholders or minority, that we can retrieve information on local know-hows and traditional and indigenous knowledge, which is crucial if we want to decolonize science and groundwater management, which is something that we really need. And also we can work in full respect of the cultural value of water and cultural sensitivities. And finally, let me stress that with a reductionist approach, we often tend to see people only as the main responsible for environmental problems. And this is most the case quite often. But indeed, it's time to considering people like all of us as possible driver for a solution and imagine new and more inclusive paths for groundwater sustainability. And with this, I thank you and remain available for any further questions.
Thank you, Viviana, for that clear presentation, for sticking to time. Now I'd like to invite Priya Sankar from Agiam to give her presentation. Over to you, Priya.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm going to talk about scaling community-led groundwater management. Next slide, please. India is a groundwater economy and the largest extractor of groundwater in the world. Because groundwater is a common pool resource and a finite resource, communities will have to make trade-offs that will benefit the collective but affect individuals. Such decisions are best made by community closest to the ground. To make such decisions, communities have to be equipped with knowledge to understand and manage their water. Next slide, please. Years of civil society advocacy on community participation has led to governments and multilateral agencies to invest large sums of money in participatory programs in water security. Now that money is available, execution has to happen at scale. Next slide, please. Community-led programs are inherently complex, and our existing models cannot be scaled. First of all, government programs struggle to bring community participation. They don't have the capacity to reach or connect with people beyond the level of districts. Programs spend at least a year in creating content, training people, collecting data and creating plans as if there was none of these work which have happened before. This whole collective memory loss of all the past efforts is because there is no information on trained people and content. Moreover, large participatory programs involve many stakeholders across departments, agencies, civil society groups, and the community. Designing and managing participatory programs, unlike traditional programs, is actually quite complex. Next slide, please. I would like to share some of our learnings from a program funded by the World Bank in the state of Meghalaya, covering 6,400 villages and a population of 2.9 million people. The objective of this program was to train more than 15,000 community facilitators across the state on how to manage their water and natural resources so that they can create scientific plans that reflects the needs of their community while incorporating traditional knowledge. We designed this program with what we call the first mile approach. Next slide, please. Who is a first mile? A first mile person is someone from the community closest to the unit of change included in the program design. Community resource persons or CRPs are actually necessary to facilitate and establish participation from the community. We have to invest in building their capacity and empower them with digital tools that can generate data as they are getting trained and doing their roles, tools that can also give back knowledge, resources back to them to refer and learn and share. Next slide, please. If this person's capacity has to be built, what does he or she need? One, regular access to experts to clarify doubts. Usually there is a gap of 6 to 8 months from the time they are trained to the time they go to the field to work. There will be so many practical operational doubts when they are on the field. The best way to address and clarify such questions is to supplement the training sessions with weekly virtual interactions. The scheduled interaction every week actually helps them to share and learn more from each other. Women CRPs especially find these virtual sessions useful to manage their time. Two, they need content that is easy to understand in their own language and always available with them. Three, they need data as proof and recognition of their training. Creating a digital trail in the form of attestations allows CRPs to claim incentives within the program and look for opportunities outside the programs. Next slide, please. When thousands of community resource persons have to go to the field and do simultaneously their job, how do we manage this scale? We deployed digital tools that were designed keeping the first mile in mind. First one is the participatory digital attestation developed by Socion. It is a simple mobile app that a CRP uses to scan a QR code at the beginning of every training session and scans a QR at the end of the session. This one simple act of scanning a QR pushes all the training material onto their phones, gives them access to all the training material and a digital attestation as proof of their training. CRPs can share these attestations within the program to get paid for the work and outside the program to look for opportunities. It also generates data that flows into dashboards, which program managers can review to track the progress of capacity building on a real-time basis. Second one is CLART, Composite Landscape Assessment and Restoration Tool developed by Foundation for Ecological Security. This is a GIS tool made for the first mile. A CRP can go around her village and use this app. It picks up the lat-long of that spot and recommends a set of interventions most suited for that area based on the recharge potential of the area. The CRP can discuss with her community and decide which intervention to pick and submit on the app. This app works without internet even when on the field. Imagine thousands of CRPs submitting interventions from across the state. The CLART portal allows experts to review them remotely from a website and give feedback, which goes back to the CRP. Next slide, please. So what are the voices from the ground saying? What does a first mile person say about all this? Madhuri Sangma is one such community facilitator from a small village in Meghalaya. She credits technology for building her knowledge and skills. She takes pride in her work and is confident to take on more responsibilities. Next slide. Like her, there are 12,512 CRPs trained across 5,700 villages in the state of Meghalaya. The blue dots that you see on the screen are actually the people. We know who they are, where they are located, what are they trained on what are their plans that they have created. We are right now in the planning phase and yet to implement to reach water security. But in the last 18 months, we have established a scalable process to cover all the 6,400 villages of the state, to enable CRPs to consult their communities and come up with a scientific plan to manage their own water and natural resources. There is trusted and open data on trained people, content, and plans put up by the government on a website. We are already seeing these trained people are being hired in other programs, paid for their work, the content and tools being reused in other programs. Next slide, please. Therefore, to summarize, scaling community-led groundwater management requires us to redesign programs, keeping the first mile, the person closest to the community, at the center. We need community resource persons to scale community-led programs. We have to design capacity building as a continuous process, allowing for more interactions with experts and peers, offering knowledge resources always available to them in their phones. We have to make the CRPs visible online by generating trusted data on people, content, and artifacts that support program governance and leave behind this data as reusable assets for other programs and the ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you, Priya, for a very clear presentation and making a very complicated subject understandable to all of us. And next, I'd like to, we'll be having a short video presentation put together by the World Bank, and it really complements the presentation that Priya has just given, I think. So over to the video.
But it's not that important. They're just giving a random video right now.
Thanks, Paul here with you again. I'd like to say that a representative from the World Bank is in the audience today. So during the discussion, feel free to ask questions related to that video if that inspires you. And it's good to see some questions coming up in the chat box. Please keep them coming, please, thick and fast. And next, I'd like to invite our next speaker, who is Francesca Gunther, who will talk to us about self-supply. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm happy to present you our work on understanding household self-supply use and management in urban Indonesia. This work is a collaboration between University of Technology Sydney and the Universitas Indonesia, and is funded by the Water for Women Fund. Next slide, please. In urban Indonesia, 30 million people self-supply their drinking water from groundwater sources in the form of dugwells or boreholes. Household self-supply refers to a privately owned water source located on the household premises that is financed and managed by individual households. Self-supply services are generally unregulated and unmonitored and overlooked by policy. The extent to which households use self-supply as a complement to alternative water sources remain unclear. Understanding the reliance of households on self-supply and its associated management is crucial to develop support strategies to ensure safe and reliable drinking water service for households. Next slide, please. Therefore, this study seeks to understand the use and non-use of self-supply water service and alternative water choices, and how self-supply is managed by individual households, including intra-household gender dynamics. With non-use, we mean the reasons behind the choice to not use a given source. Next slide, please. We used an explanatory sequential mixed methods approach with a quantitative component, including a cross-sectional household survey, followed by a qualitative component, including in-depth interviews. The structured household survey was carried out in 300 randomly selected households in Bekasi and Metro. The household survey covered a range of themes about the household, water sources used, and perception of water service attributes. Questions about the households included themes on health and socioeconomic status, water management, and decision-making. The captured relevant themes of the 24 purposefully selected in-depth interviews included information on self-supply water quality perception, water availability, water choices, workload, including roles and responsibilities, and conflicts. The study showed that self-supply was the preferred drinking water source because of the perceived safety, taste, and appearance at both study sites. Private boreholes were predominantly used as a main water source for drinking and also domestic uses in Bekasi and private dugwells in Metro. Public piped water did not reach all households equally, therefore not all households could get access to piped connections. However, if available, public pipe services were generally not used for drinking and cooking due to several reasons such as lack of trust, lack of reliability, perceived bad smell of chlorine, costs, and the preference for self-supply water. Boiling of self-supply water before consumption was widely practiced and was found to improve the water quality between source and point of use. Next. However, boiling has also limitations such as the associated workload, fuel costs, and household air pollution caused by the fuels to boil water. In Bekasi and Metro, LPG was the most frequently used fuel for water boiling. However, wood, which can cause household air pollution, was still used by almost 30% of households in Metro. The labor involved in boiling water could not always be managed, so households frequently used alternative water sources, such as refill water from refill water depots, which is more convenient as it does not require boiling. For example, one female respondent stated, "In the past, when I was still strong, I looked for wood to boil the water. Now I'm no longer strong enough to boil water, so I buy water in gallons." However, some respondents perceived health issues from drinking refill water in gallons, such as stomach ache. The in-depth interviews revealed that households that could afford to replace dugwells with deeper boreholes with a motorized pump as a response to groundwater problems. Descriptive results showed that 25% of wells had gone dry and 18% of respondents had to deepen their dugwell in Bekasi and Metro. Half the reported in-depth interviews informants reported water quality concerns such as cloudy or turbid water. Further reasons for the switch from dugwells to boreholes were the convenience of conveying water with a motorized pump compared to the rope and bucket or hand pumps used with dugwells, the large space required, and lack of protection for children. Not all households could afford to construct a borehole. In the household survey, 42% of respondents reported high construction costs as a reason for not using private boreholes. Water management tasks of self-supply service were usually distributed between female and male household members. Female household members were mostly responsible for managing water in home, while male household members were mostly responsible for maintenance and repairs, cleanliness of the source and finance at both study sites. Approximately 2/3 of the surveyed households shared responsibility in self-supply tasks between household members at both study sites. Responsibilities included the tasks from the previous slides, such as managing water in home, cleanliness, maintenance and repairs, and finance. Decisions related to self-supply were usually made jointly or were the responsibility of a sole man, less often of a sole female. In-depth interviews show that responsibilities and decision-making varied across households. One male in-depth informant explained the cooperation regarding responsibilities and workload of self-supply services. Some respondents had specific gender norms and expectations regarding the roles of women and men. When asked a woman in Metro why not a man is cooking water, she replied, "Seriously, the man who boils water? Have you ever imagined a man boiling water?" The informant laughed and said, "No need, it's simple. Just turn the stove button, that's all. Take water, it's not difficult." However, widows, people who were living alone, and families with members with special needs faced increased challenge regarding the workload. One woman, for example, said, "If there is no man, it's difficult. There is no head of the family." So some consideration to support and regulate self-supply towards a safely managed water service can be concluded from this study. Strategies to improve the safety and reliability of self-supply should consider the point of use, including safe household water treatment and its management. To sustain self-supply service long-term, regulations are needed to protect groundwater availability and quality. When supporting self-supply, the safety and reliability of alternative water supply should be considered, as this supply serves as a supplement to address groundwater quality and availability issues that will increase in future. The fact that self-supply is on premises and the household's own responsibility, the cooperation between household members in terms of management, and the shared strong interest in its success mean that operational sustainability was high. So thank you very much for your attention.
And thank you, Francisca, for a very interesting presentation, some of the opportunities and challenges in groundwater management in an Asian megacity. And next, we go to Western India, and we have Mr. Dhaval Joshi talking to us for the final presentation.
Thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, everyone from India. I'm going to pick up from what Viviana discussed in her keynote about embedding local knowledge, harmonizing knowledges, or also embedding or integrating local experiences. And that is where this presentation speaks to. I mean, that is where this presentation is coming from, about recognizing other knowledges of groundwater. It is from the Western Indian state of Maharashtra. And it is quite opposite to what Priya discussed in her presentation about Meghalaya, which is on the eastern part of the country. Next. So I will not again dwell into the role of groundwater in India's water security. I think Priya did it very well in her introduction. But what I want to point is that all this emphasis and dependency and crisis of groundwater has led to a recognition of knowledge about these groundwater systems and why it is very important to have understanding, talk about good data, data availability, granularity of data for effectively managing groundwater and governing groundwater. What has happened as a part of this discourse is we see a lot of frameworks adopting a participatory approach of monitoring groundwater. As you can see in this picture from the right, it is from one of the villages where a piezometer or automatic water level recorder has been installed in one of the villages. And as you can see from the nature of its installation, it's quite present in the locality, but quite inaccessible for the locals. And that is where I'm trying to talk about, can we move beyond the monitoring framework where we are just talking about water levels to understand more about groundwater, about its hydrogeology, aquifers, and recharge and discharge processes. And next. And that is where I try to define these other knowledges, because I borrow a lot from the science and technology studies, which discuss that resources are not existing a priori, but they are made possible through the work of scientists, of researchers, as well as communities who depend on it on an everyday basis. And I define the other knowledges in this context for the part of for the sake of this presentation as those which are not part of any scientific reports or policy, documents or guidelines, but still affect and still, lead to shaping the practices of groundwater use at the local and even at the mega level. I present this work as a part of my fieldwork for my PhD, where I have used a mixed method approach, predominantly a qualitative approach of talking to people, semi-structured interviews, oral histories, but at the same time borrowing from the hydrogeological discipline of doing transect walks, walking along the watershed or the catchment. And for this sake of this presentation, I will be focusing on 3 elements of groundwater, that is the type of rocks, recharge and discharge areas, and the nature of aquifers. Next, rocks are very important, as something that should be known if we are trying to talk about groundwater. If you look at the Deccan basalts, which is one of the largest volcanic provinces across the globe, there are 3 larger rock types that are identified usually in the scientific reports. They are like compact basalts, vesicular, amygdaloidal or vesicular basalts, and a red layer, which is like defining the 2 lava flows. However, while during my interaction with the communities, I understood that there are different types of compact basalts and vesicular basalts that they identify, and that kind of shapes their practices of groundwater use. For example, a farmer, he or she drilling a dug well in Pashan or in compact basalt, very well knows that it is a storage structure more than a structure that can recover thanks to the aquifer. But a farmer who is drilling it in Mansrea, which is a kind of a name for the vesicular basalt in the local level, they realize it, they recognize it that as a recovery, as a continuous resource, a resource that is available throughout the year. And that is what shapes their farming decisions. That is what shapes their crop choices and things like that. And that is where I emphasize this very, very heterogeneous micro level nature of rock types that are present, which we don't usually see in the larger reports brought out by the state groundwater agency or the central groundwater boards. Next. Secondly, I saw a lot of discussions around recharge areas and discharge areas in the villages and how they recognize it. The map on the right that you see is produced for the same village by the state groundwater agency. And the light blue color that you see in that map is essentially a high priority area for recharge interventions. Apparently, many of the people in the village told me that if we are going to intervene in this area, the village will not get any benefits, but it will be mostly the village downstream that will get a lot of recharge benefits. And that is where they speak about how they make decisions about positioning their wells. Many of the wells in the villages are along the streams, recognizing the movement, understanding that there is a certain, there is a knowledge about how groundwater moves in the area. About 80 to 90% of the wells along the stream is something that is interesting to be noticed. Secondly, they also recognize what is called as the red layer or the lal patta in the village. And that is what they identify as a potential recharge area where interventions can be beneficial for groundwater improvement. Next. Lastly, there is a recent program by the government of India called the NAQUIM program, in which there is talk about mapping aquifers, and they are actually producing reports. This one I have brought out is from the district of Usmanabad. And as you can see, that the deeper aquifer, that is aquifer 2 in this case, the light green color, is quite extensive and at the same time very homogeneous. At least it is the reflection in the map that we are seeing here. But the experiences of the people are very, very different from what is being reflected in the map. And that brings us to the question of scale and application of this understanding that we are producing about these aquifers. People recognize the confined aquifers through 3 different interventions that they do. They drill these bore wells, which are small diameter, deeper wells. And they recognize that there is Doha, Nas, Doha, which is like a perched aquifer, which is like a good yield, but inconsistent. And this is all within a single village, a single small micro watershed. And as well as some of them founded Nas or Sub, which is kind of translates loosely to a joints or fractures. And that is where they kind of suggested that they are more sustainable in nature. And if we look at the map again below, it's quite extensive. I mean, we are talking about an area, if you can see the scale, it is about more than 60, 70 kilometers. And that is where the question about applicability of the knowledge that are produced from most of the top-down approaches comes into question. Lastly, to kind of summarize and to kind of conclude is, hello. Just as scientists make their resources, there is a continuous resource making that is happening at the very, very local level by communities, by groundwater users, which they kind of manifest through experiences, their observations and everyday practices. And that is where my argument comes into. We have a possibility of moving beyond the monitoring paradigm, a paradigm that is clearly emphasized on monitoring water levels or water quality. We saw a video about Atal Jal in the beginning. Under the Atal Jal program, there is an interesting initiative. It is welcome. It is really welcome to monitor these water levels and quality. But I think there is a need here to move beyond monitoring. Under the Atal Jal program, they are going to monitor about 10 wells in each of these villages. But can the communities tell us beyond the water levels? And I think this is this case study kind of brings that argument to the forefront. And then brings the question that are there opportunities for such a participatory framework, a participatory socio-hydrogeological framework to be adapted? And I think Atal Bhujal Yojana or the Atal Yojana gives that kind of opportunity to us. I mean, it is a very, very decentralized micro-level program focusing on 8,500 villages. And I think that is where we can try to modify our existing frameworks of monitoring to integrate and embed local practices and experiences, so that we have better understanding about the groundwater. And also the UNESCO's 9th International Hydrological Program talks about embedding or improving citizen science, such that it influences policies around groundwater and water in general. And that is where I think there is also an onus or an emphasis on trying to highlight or bring these kind of understandings or knowledges into the mainstream. How can we mainstream these kind of things? So I believe to conclude, if we are talking about valuing groundwater, and I think that is the whole theme of not only this seminar, but also this entire World Water Week. I think we have to begin not at the resource itself, but also at how these resources are understood. And that is where valuing the knowledges that make these resources becomes very important. And only then we can have frameworks that kind of help in co-producing knowledge about the groundwater. I think with that, I will want to conclude. Thank you. If there are any questions, I will be happy to answer them. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Deval. I think you've given us a lot of food for thought, and I hope the chat box is running hot after your presentation. And we'll move on to our final video presentation with the most wonderful and imaginative name you can think of. And again, a representative, a maker of the video, the maker of the video is present in the audience. So please feel free to ask questions.
Our project is called Diamonds on the Soles of Their Feet. And we are really pleased to be able to present that to you today. We are working in a very remote rural area in the Limpopo province in South Africa, where over 75% of residents are dependent on groundwater for crops and their daily water use. There's a hydrological void as the wells are so remote, and citizen science is a solution to this lacuna in data where Department of Water Affairs can simply not get the data in other ways. We're using very low-cost technology, dip meters and grain gauges to measure rainfall and water levels in boreholes. And ordinary farmers and citizens are now becoming real scientists. They're getting the data, they're able to interpret the data, and they are adding value to this hydrological void. And the technology is very appropriate, simple technology.
I joined citizen science through volunteering. I was called to a workshop and then I volunteered. Then I didn't understand what I was doing at first because I just thought I was just measuring water with a water gauge, which I didn't even know the difference between a water gauge and a water meter. So now I go to other boreholes to measure them. I understand what is going on. I understand a little about groundwater, but not much. I would like to know more through citizen science, because we have professors here who will help us do that. So I'm very grateful to be part of the team.
Themselves and is proved to be very accurate. The terrain is difficult. It's geographically very difficult, remote areas, and difficult to access. We call citizen science taking science from the laboratory right out into the field. Thank you very much. This is diamonds on the soles of their feet.
And that concludes the formal part of the session, and with all the presentations and wonderful videos. Now we'd like to open it up to Q&A. And due to the limits of technology, the audience can't verbally state their questions, but you can feel free to put them in the chat box. And others within the organising team will help me to pick out some of the most pertinent ones and ask the presentation panel to comment on that. Well, I think I'd like to start with one interesting question that came up, given by Bakshal Lashari, saying that management of groundwater is really a challenge, especially in the context of Pakistan, but we could think of many other places as well. We need a holistic approach, community, professionals, researchers, policy level stakeholders to be on one page. And I'd really like to get some feedback from the presenters about whether that holistic approach that Bakshal has talked about really has been come out. And I think I saw Priya raise her hand. Was that correct, Priya? I think what I'm looking for is volunteers from amongst the presenters to give their thoughts and comments.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for the question. I didn't raise my hand, but I think it's a very important question what he's raised about how do we ensure that there is a collaboration of community, professionals, stakeholders, I think one thing we are trying from Argyam is building partnerships between the state, civil society, community representatives, and the market. In fact, the presentation that I talked about on Meghalaya is a good example of how we are bringing all of them together to work to create a program that can scale and help in managing the groundwater, which is also participatory and community-led. So, I mean, it is possible. You have to design it with people at the center and take everything else, into consideration.
Thank you, Priya. Are there other thoughts from the speakers on that question there? I see Viviana has raised her hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, very briefly, I agree with Priya, but also like to integrate maybe coming from academia. I think also education is very important. I think it's really time to start educating the new generation of science. Of course, we need the of course, if you're an engineer, if you're an hydrogeologist, you want to go for that and you need to be specialized, but opening up a bit the program to be more aware of other disciplines, that to train the new generation to be ready to take this challenge of actually working holistically. And this is something that we could consider, because in that way we can really make sure that we are ready to face this challenge and put our hands on that.
Thank you. That's an area I think you can make a great contribution in, and others like you. I see that Jacqueline's got her hand raised. I'm not sure if we're able to unmute you, Jacqueline, and so you can give your question verbally. I'll do my best. Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, fantastic. Okay.
Wonderful.
So what's really interesting is I come from the social side. I'm an anthropologist working with groundwater experts. And what I think is missing is when one talks about community development, it takes time and you need budgets. And often there's a lot of focus on the technical side, but not enough focus on how long it takes to engage people and what kind of methodologies you need. So there really are fantastic methodologies. I mean, River of Life, participatory mapping, all kinds of things. So I think we need more focus on when you're working with people, it takes time and you need really kind of dedicated budgets and appreciation also that you're dealing with emotions. People feel annoyed or angry or hopeful or have dignity. So just kind of to bring in that softer side. Yeah, that's really all I want to say. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jacqueline. That's excellent. Other thoughts from the presenters? Other questions from the audience? And I apologize, I can't see the names of every presenter. I'd have to toggle through 3 or 4 screens to do that. Please feel free to ask questions in Partable if I can't see your hand. It's great to see Yulia there. Raise their hand, Noel. Please go ahead.
Hello, do you hear me? Because it's banned Zoom in my organization, so I'm not sure if it's worked properly. Thank you. It's a very interesting session, and I really enjoyed all presentation. I represent international organization, and we have a lot of trainings, and we are training people on very specific tools. And we noticed that actually during this training, people not distributing knowledge later to other communities. And like Viviana and I think Jacqueline mentioned, we need also probably not only include scientific part, but also leadership in training. Because we need to train leaders who are able after to communicate with community. We are transferring scientific knowledge, but we also should couple training now with distribution of soft skill and leadership, to train leadership, to distribute and to impact, to make a sustainable decision. So I would like to ask to comment what they're thinking about that, to couple science with social for training. If it was clear.
Yeah, maybe I can quickly. Thank you, Yulia, for the question, for raising this point. And I think, as Jacqueline mentioned, I think we are all in the same page somehow. And the challenge will be probably how to translate that into practice. From my perspective, I'm seeing a lot of interest in social hydrogeology from students, maybe, that are really keen and eager to get a step further and learn from different disciplines. So it's true, it takes time, and we really need to learn how to learn new languages, know new skills, and how to maybe change your bias perspective. So I think if we start from project and trying to put different competencies together into action, then we can learn from each other and then go a step further and start training. And clearly it should be done by different people and different individuals from different backgrounds to train in this direction.
Thank you, Viviana. I see Mr. Ghulam Zakir Hassan, you had your hand raised. Would you like to ask your question, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Paul. Thank you very much. My name is Zakir. I am joining from Pakistan. I am Director, Research Institute at Lahore. So a very interesting session. I must congratulate the organizer for organizing this wonderful event. I am thankful to Madam Lucy for inviting us for this event. My question is, I will just further extend to question asked by Dr. Lashari, that in Pakistan, we have very complex groundwater system. It is unconfined aquifer underlying the Indus River basin, and it is a huge, big one aquifer. It is unconfined. And I would like to request the experts to guide that how can we govern if we are going to monitor, if we have introduced the Water Act, and we are going to issue permit, licensing, and other issues to monitor, manage, and govern the groundwater. So what are the specific tips how to monitor the pumpage extraction by different users? in an unconfined aquifer, because we don't have a very concise hydrogeological boundaries, and how can we monitor and how can we govern the actually in-field condition? Thank you.
Thanks so much for that very interesting and challenging question that probably applies in many other regions as well. Is there anyone who'd like to have a stab at answering that?
Yeah, can I come in?
Please.
Hello, thank you for that wonderful question. And I think I agree with you in the point that these alluvial settings, these alluvial aquifer systems, I presume here that the Indus Basin is also alluvial aquifer system. They are extensive, and that brings the whole challenge about whom do we collectivize, with whom do we work? Because in case of the basalts where I was speaking about, they are very, very localized, very, very micro-regional aquifers. I think there are some interesting experiences from India where efforts to at least collectively recognize the extent of the aquifer has begun. And I think I can point to the state of Gujarat, where they have this sandstone aquifer, the Kankavati sandstone aquifer as it is known, encompassing about 800 villages. I think the first step here is, before any beginning to any management plans, I think first step is to recognize that this is a shared aquifer system, and that the use or the intensity of use in one particular area will be affecting other regions in that particular aquifer setting. I think that will be an interesting thing to see, to look out for, the Kankavati sandstone aquifer experience from Gujarat. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
And now I'd like to invite Venkatashal Alam to ask his question, who had his hand
Thank you,
raised.
Paul. Thank you very much. This is a question to Priya. Priya, it was a very excellent presentation. But as far as community management is concerned, it can work well only when we are dealing with a kind of small area, actually, or small group of people using the groundwater. Maybe, useful, community management can work in the case of common property resources, but definitely not the case of common pool resources like, groundwater in a larger region, actually. Because in a larger region, you have, many different types of users, and some of them are imposing negative externality on other users. So there are users as well as victims in this particular larger region, and bringing all of them together to work under the community management regime is a very difficult task, actually. It is extremely costly also. This has been proved by many theoretical studies as well as empirical studies by Elinor Ostrom and others. So how do you respond to this particular type of issue that we very often face in the case of groundwater use in a larger region?
I agree with you, Venkatachalam. Having a large number of stakeholders, community, and getting them to agree on, common use is actually difficult. I don't think there is a simple answer to that. But how we would maybe flip it and look at it is this thing about generating trusted data or the rails for people to be visible. Just making that available in some ways, for example, what I feel is it enables, it will show whether collaboration is happening or not. It may not be the solution, but it will point out to areas of what is happening. So I think we would start with that and say the people that I mentioned as CRPs, community resource persons, they, over a period of time, when we invest in them, they become leaders of their own communities in, one, they gain knowledge and they become leaders of creating a kind of agreement or governance principles But this is not something you could do at one shot. What we are looking at it is, how do we look at it at an overall scale sense? You create some rails of data infrastructure which enable these people to be made visible, their knowledge to be made visible. And in a course of a few years, these people start collaborating, start looking at what is happening. So I would say the data would by itself become a source of information. It doesn't necessarily, it doesn't mean if it's there, it will solve by itself. But by making it available, you allow many other solvers to come in and help the community. I would still invest in that and make that as a start. But I agree with you, it's not easy at all to get so many people to agree and govern their own common pool resources. That is the challenge of scaling participatory programs.
Thanks, Eva.
Thank you for that interesting question and excellent response. If I can just throw my opinion in here, I think what we're hearing is that although we're talking very much about a people-centered approach, hydrogeology does matter. It's at the core of this as well. And the challenges of managing a large alluvial aquifer are very different to that of measuring, to managing a dynamic hard rock aquifer, which is very responsive. And there are much stronger imperatives for communities to come together and manage the response, because they can see differences in a few years, and the impacts are also much more immediate. So hydrogeology does matter. In terms of the experience, as I tried to say in my introduction, this field of science and practice has only been around in a documented scientific sense for a few decades, and much of it has been done very much at the local scale until the last few years. It's only in recent times that we're starting to scale it out through large programs like Atal Borjal. So really the jury is still out in terms of how much effort is required, how long it will take to start to see success. But I think the ambitions are good, but it's not a shortcut for groundwater management. It's an essential part of groundwater management. Thanks. And I'd like to invite others to ask questions while we still have 13 minutes left for Q&A.
Well, I think there was a question in the chat for Francisca that from Jenny, that thanks her for and the team for highlighting self-supply as a strategy critical also in urban areas. And thanks for adding the quality, health, and treatment aspect on how bottled water can complement. So the question is, did you also ask about rainwater harvesting or other recharge methods?
Thank you, Viviana. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Jenny, for the question. Yes, we did collect all information on the used water supplies and included also rainwater collection, but at our study sites in Bekasi and Metro, rainwater harvesting was only rarely used or not at all. And yes, this is different to other study sites, for example, in rural Vanuatu, where self-supply is predominantly like rainwater harvesting. But this was not the case in Bekasi and Metro.
And I think if I can, there is also another question for you from, I lost the chat, from Jay. Yeah, can you?
Like, how should water be regulated when self-supply? Do you mean like this one? And yeah. Yes, I think this is the hardest question, and I would love if I could present you like a solution. And I think self-supply is very context specific. The regulations need to be like context specific. And in other study sites, for example, I think Jenny knows more on that, like their self-supply is implemented like as a strategy. But like in our study sites, self-supply is already there and implemented by the households themselves. So it's very challenging to regulate something with like households already have. And for example, another study in Bangladesh of Fisher et al., he proposed, he sees the shift like towards on-premise pipe systems with a motorized pump, like the shift from dugwells to boreholes as an opportunity to align like the user demands and payments with like regulated services. But the question with the regulation is also like whether to invest in public pipe systems, where there is the risk of the non-use that households not want to use pipe service because of several reasons, like for example, the taste of chlorine and payments, and that they already prefer self-supply, or like the investment in better self-supply service, like to improve infrastructure, to increase like the water quality. So I think it's very complex question, and I think I cannot fully present like a solution on how to regulate self-supply. And yeah, but yes, thanks for the question.
And thanks for your very open and honest answer, Francisca. It's great. Next question comes from Frederick Faber. Please unmute Frederick and ask your question.
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So I work in Sierra Leone, and I'm working in the east part of Sierra Leone, where we are implementing innovation of EMAS wash, which is a low-cost technology for drilling boreholes. So my question really is around the definition of wash self-supply. In our context, it's really confusing. What is the difference between wash self-supply and subsidized self-supply? Because we are in a complex situation where it's really confusing. How can we define wash self-supply? So that's my question.
Thank you, Frederick, and please, Francisca, if you could have a stab at answering that, please.
Yeah. So, like in our study site, we defined it as privately owned water source that is located on the household premises, and that is financed and managed by an individual household. So the household is responsible for their own supply. But I think in other contexts, the definition is like different. And yeah, I think their self-supply is used to, yes, as a, like as a strategy to improve the water supply. So the household is given the self-supply source as a, like to subsidize, but I don't know, maybe Jenny Groundwater knows more on that, because I think at the other study side, it's defined like differently.
Frederick, can you please repeat the question, and I can complement what Francisca has said.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I said I wanted clarity on the definition of self-supply, wash self-supply, looking at our own context in Sierra Leone. So one of the developing countries, we are targeting poor communities. And I want to really know how we can define wash self-supply or subsidized wash self-supply, because the project I am running is defined as wash self-supply. But when you look at the definition based on our context, it seems there is a confusion in how we can really define wash self-supply.
Great, let me come in there. So self-supply basically is when a household and a community invest themselves in more often groundwater access. And this is because they are inadequately supplied from elsewhere. It could be that they have rationed water supply that is not sufficient for their needs, or they do not have any other alternative. So that is the basic definition of self-supply water. And you're asking about WASH in its entirety, and that's going beyond the concept of water self-supply, I would say. Very many households and communities, of course, also invest in sanitation, equipment, infrastructure, and so on. And you should look at all of this in its entirety from a holistic point of view, of course. But I would say that as of today, most of the research and the concept of self-supply is very focused on the water sourcing as such. I hope this helps.
Thank you, Jenny and Frederick. I hope you're satisfied with those responses. I'll ask Sinab to ask a question in a moment, but I also take note that nobody has asked questions in relation to those two wonderful videos that we watched a little bit earlier. So if anybody has burning questions in relation to the work behind those videos, please feel free to raise your hand. Now over to you, Sinab. Great to see you here. Sinab, are you there? And do you still have a question? Okay, let's.
Oh yes, sorry, unmuting. Even after two years of COVID, still a struggle. Thanks, Paul, and hi everyone. My question comes back to the aspect of time and trust, and I think all speakers have emphasized the importance of time and trust in the projects that are running. And I'm wondering, do you see this reflected from the funders' side? Are funders expanding the time that they're giving for projects to be run? What's your experience there? Because what I've seen so far is sometimes relatively short project cycles, and of course also policy and decision makers maybe wanting quick outcomes, and funders, of course, also needing quick outcomes. But is there any paradigm shift, any shift from that side? I hope my question was clear. To allow for more time and trust to be built. Yeah.
Thanks, Sinab. It's a good question. Maybe if I could ask perhaps Priya to try to answer that with regard to your work in the Northeast, perhaps, and other speakers who'd like to share their opinions on that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, sure, Paul. Thanks for the question. And very rightly so, you need time to build trust. Yes, our engagement in Meghalaya has been for more than, 18 months is the one when we started the scale journey, but we've been working with the state, with many partners longer than that. And yes, it takes time to build that trust and relationship. I would actually flip it to also take it to the community, how it takes time to build trust for them to, understand and manage the resources, which is the element that I talked about, increasing interactions. The traditional approach, when you look at NGOs and partners who go to the ground and work, experts working with the community, it takes a good amount of 5 to 6 years, long time to build that. And what they're effectively doing with the community is to actually make them trust and, build that relationship for them to listen and understand and gain that knowledge. how you could accomplish that when you are doing it at scale is to allow for the interaction to happen. Generally, having programs where you say you will have trainings once every 6 months doesn't make sense. Well, what do you even share as knowledge? How does a person even gain anything? So therefore, it's really critical in making those interactions, we call them core interactions with core actors, which allows for them to reach out to an expert and even share across peers. So we see that in both sides. One, for funders to also look at programs as not, a short-term period or something, and we replicate the same thing when you design programs also. So I agree with you. It is an important thing, and we do engage on, we don't necessarily go in with a very short term in mind. Thank you.
Thanks, Priya. We're out of time, but Jacqueline, if your question's short and the answer can be even shorter, then we'll take it. Otherwise, we'll draw this Q&A to a close. So,
very short comment is, I think one of the concerns is that we work with big interdisciplinary teams where there is like a top-heavy engineer, geologist kind of component. And it's lovely to hear Priya say like up to 5 years. I think, Priya, you're so right. We told usually it's a year or 2 years, but at least. The other thing that I just wanted to mention is the exit strategy. You're building trust, and then suddenly your project comes to an end, your funds come to an end, and you kind of leave the community in the lurch. So I think as a community of practice, we need to think through these things. And Priya and others who presented here today, I'd love to be in an email contact with you so that we can talk to each other and see how we can do this work better. So perhaps, I don't know how we can get email addresses of the presenters, but thank you.
Sure, Jacqueline. I'll share our email IDs on the chat window.
And I'm sure the organizers can do a job at trying to connect this all together to keep this conversation going. I'm sorry, Bikura, I can't take your question now, but if you'd like to ask it in the chat, please feel free. All that's left now to do is to sum up a little bit, and I'd find it a real struggle to try to sum up the conversation we've just had over the last 3/4 of an hour, half an hour, but I'll share with you my preconceived thoughts in terms of this session. I think what we have done is been fairly true to the title of keeping our ear to the ground rather than our head in the sand, in the sense that people have been at the heart of this and their connection to the resource and their local environment that they so much rely on. Our speakers have brought a number of strong messages to this seminar. Viviana, through her keynote, highlighted the following: that awareness, attitudes and perceptions of groundwater users are unseen variables in hydrogeological assessments and modelling. Socio-hydrogeology can help to further develop the hydrogeology by critically reflecting on the role of groundwater science within society. She made these points very clearly in her presentation. Deval talked about Hard Rock India and introduced us to a new way to look at the question of what constitutes groundwater knowledge, and in particular, the power of local knowledge that has accumulated over long periods of time from the so-called barefoot hydrogeologists who rely exclusively on groundwater for their domestic supply and their livelihoods. Priya's talk focused on the northeast of India and has taught us that empowering communities with knowledge to enable their effective participation is one of the key pillars in ensuring that large financial investments being made by the government of India and other donors into water security is successful. Francisca's talk took us into the urban areas of Java, where households cannot always rely or sometimes prefer not to use piped water supply. There are clear incentives for households to come together to improve the reliability and quality of their supply, and that's probably an area of research for the future. One question that I would like to leave you with today to ponder upon is, what is the role of communities in groundwater management, in the sense that, is it a surrogate for groundwater action, or is it really a valuable supplement? This is a critical issue going forward and may provide future contributions of this kind. So with that, I'd like to say thank you to the speakers for their excellent contributions, to the organizer and to the video producers, to the organisers for the smooth running of this session and all the hard work in the previous weeks and months of preparation. A big thank you to the audience for your attention and rich engagement. And finally, a reminder that session 2 in the Valuing Groundwater series will be held on Wednesday, the 31st of August at 9 a.m. CET time. We hope that you can join then. So goodbye from us, stay safe and all the best. Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.